Hello, thanks for joining me. I'm going to spend some time today talking about the right hand and my specific right hand technique. And for the left hand, we're going to work on some fingerboard harmony, and then we'll spend some time on playing fretless bass. Before we get started, here's some notes we can tune up to. Here's a G, a D, an A, an E, and for those of you with low B, here it is. Okay, let's get started. First thing I'd like to do is cover some ideas that you can use whether you play with 2 fingers or 3 fingers. You actually play the bass with these muscles right here. Okay, they've been strong enough to play the bass since you were about 3 years old. They're connected to tendons that go across the hand or through the hand, and there's not any muscles actually in this part of the wrist that you use to play the bass, or that you should use to play the bass. So if you borrow some tips from classical piano technique and support the upper arm with these muscles here, keep these muscles relaxed, and keep your arm and wrist straight, you can transfer this energy directly to your fingers and use it more effectively. One thing you can do to see how the right hand works is to take the middle fingers and lock them, and with your wrist straight, pull kind of hard. All right, and you'll find that you've got plenty of strength there. A misconception about playing the bass is that people have to develop a lot of strength and stamina, and you've actually had these muscles develop since you're very young. If you do this pulling, you'll find that you feel pretty strong. You can put a lot of tension there. If you bend the wrist, which is what a lot of bass players do, about this angle, and try to do the same thing, you'll find that it becomes painful real quick. There's a small opening here that all these tendons are attached and go through, that if you keep it straight, you're able to play a lot more efficiently. A problem, since the bass is about 30 or 40 years old, is that acoustic technique has been passed on to electric, and it's caused a lot of people a lot of problems. When you're playing acoustic, the bass is vertical like this. You can just drop your fingers down, and they naturally hit the strings, and you can play and walk and everything. It's no problem. When you try to apply acoustic bass technique to electric, when you pick it up, you can see the bend that goes into maintaining that posture with the right hand. And that's where a lot of these problems that we just found out about this finger pulling exercise or demonstration comes from. It develops a lot of tension here, and you actually lose strength, especially if you do like a lot of bass players and lock your thumb on a pickup, all right, and pivot, which really forces your wrist to bend a lot. So what you can do, like I said, was borrow from classical piano technique. Keep your wrist straight. You end up playing the piano about like this. You support your arm with these upper muscles. You can get a direct transfer of energy from these muscles to through the tendons to your fingers, and it becomes more efficient. The first way to try to use this posture is to relax your hand completely in front of the bass. as if you'd never played it before. Try to keep your wrist straight, and that's how it would fall naturally. And then drag it back across the bass until the fingers touch. You can see that if you'd never played bass before, that's the most natural hand position you can achieve, right? Because if it's relaxed like this, all right, and you bring it back, there's no extra movements required to reach the strings. If you want to work on this posture, a good thing to do for the first couple of weeks is keep your arm and keep some distance between the bass and your arm. A lot of people have a tendency to drop their elbow down, which automatically gives you the wrist bend and the problems that we saw before. So for the first couple of weeks, keep your arm off the bass. That'll give you a nice straight line here and get more efficient use out of these fingers. One of the problems that occurs when you try to develop this technique and practice while you're sitting down, and the bass is on your leg, it forces it off to the right. All right, to reach where you normally play on the bass, tendency is to drop the elbow and bend the wrist, and we see the problems crop up again with the tension here. A way to alleviate that is to use a classical guitar technique, all right, where the bass is centered like this. If you relax your hand, just put it up there, you've got your posture back, straight line, and everything. One of the things that people notice right off the bat about my right hand technique is the amount of intensity or lack of intensity that I use in my right hand. Over the years, I've tried to teach my hand the minimum amount of effort it takes to play a note. The benefits of playing softer in the right hand is that it allows you to turn your amplifier up louder, and in a band context gives you a lot more headroom to play accents, or if a band gets louder you can go with it, and it also gives you a better sound when you play softer. Another benefit of playing lighter with the right hand is the kind of tone that you can achieve. When you strike a string hard, you get a nice big fat attack, but when the pitch settles into its regular vibration, it doesn't match the attack at all, so you hear lots of attack and not much presence afterwards. If you turn the amplifier up and play softer with your right hand, you perceive a nice big attack, and when the string settles into its pitch, it's moving about as much air as the attack does, so the overall perception is that you're moving a lot more air and the tone is fatter. Here's a little funk groove that I'm going to play, and you can check out the intensity or lack of it in the right hand, and also the headroom I've got to bring out accents and other things like that. All right? So in a band situation, those accents, the dead notes, the things that you're allowed to play louder because your main volume on your right hand, or intensity, is lower, so you can bring the accents up, is perceived as moving a lot more air. And so when you're playing with drummers, they get the impression that they're playing more because there's these dead notes and things that are coming out, and the overall feel of yourself placing yourself in the band is greatly enhanced. A good exercise you can use to check to see if you're giving yourself enough headroom with your right hand is just a simple blues bass line, and try to make the dead notes louder than the regular notes. All right, I'm going to use the dead notes from the same string and note that I started with. All right. Etc. Okay. Another way you can work on this, as for the right hand, this technique is to place your dead notes on the string below every note you're playing. All right. That requires a kind of a tricky right hand thing, but it's good for you. And that was with all the dead notes from the string below. All right, the first example had all the dead notes from the note in the string you're on. And this third one, you use the dead notes from upper strings. Etc. I got my first bass when I was 13, and the first thing I did, since I didn't have a teacher, was put 1, 2, 3 down on the strings, and then my thumb on the 4th string. And so from day one, I've been playing with 3 fingers. I use mostly 1 and 2 for most everything I do. I have 2 positions. One is an open position like this. 1, 2, and 3 are spread out. And then a closed position where 1 and 2 are on the same string. This closed position is mostly for linear type, one note next to the other type playing. And this position right here is more for stationary harmonies, funk, whatever, where I need to play octaves and sevenths and more string crossings. When I do string crossings, 2 and 3 work together up on top, and then 1 and 2 work down together below. This is mostly closed position, the linear type playing. All right, 1 and 2 do most of the work. And this is the open position for like a stationary harmony funk type deal. One of the things you probably noticed already is that I do a lot of right-hand dampening. Early on, when I was playing, I noticed these problems with left-hand dampening that crop up. When you dampen with the left hand, that's a real slow version of it. You get that buzz at the end of every note. If you dampen quickly, sometimes you can get rid of it. That's not too bad. But I worked real hard on assigning the dampening to the right hand to try to alleviate those problems. One thing I've found is that if you use rest strokes along with right hand dampening, 4 things that are good happen. The first thing, obviously, is that you don't get that fret buzz with the note. All right. All right. The second thing is that if you dampen with the right hand, your left hand is freer to execute more. All right. Along with the right hand dampening, if you use rest stroke, which is following through into the next string, all right, you end up with a finger on a string ready to go, ready to play. All right, and the fourth thing is the difference in sound when you use a rest stroke or not. This is a note played following through up into the air, and I'm playing pretty hard. All right, and now I'm not going to play nearly as hard, but I'm going to use a rest stroke and land my finger on the next string below. And you can hear that extra little thump of the finger landing on the lower string that adds to the attack. A good exercise you can use to start working on this right-hand dampening technique involves no left hand. You set up 1, 2, 3 on the A, D, and G string in this open position, and just alternate 2 Gs and 2 As. And you play a G, dampen with the second finger. All right. Now it's ready to play because it just got through dampening. Play again, dampen with the third finger. You're back in open position. All right. Play an A, dampen with the second finger. All right. It's ready to play. Play, dampen with the first finger, and reset. Okay. All right. What you want to do is make this exercise sound something like this. You want to go really slow. All right. The reason to work this exercise that slow is that you want to teach your right hand to relax in between notes. All right. So the longer between notes, as long as you're dampening and have kind of a feel for where the strings are, the more you can condition your hand to relax while it's playing. One thing I found about this exercise, and when you're trying to teach your right hand these real fine controlled movements, is to not go for cranking up the metronome right away and go for speed. Since you're dampening, you're already prepared for the next note. So the thing to do is just to work on dynamics. All right. If you train your hand to do something that's more difficult than it's going to be naturally asked to do, then when you go to play regularly, your mind will think that it's easy. All right. So you give it a harder challenge than it's normally going to get. So dynamics will achieve that. I try to make it sound like this: alternate loud and soft at first. And make sure, and not to try to overemphasize the loud note, try to make that kind of medium and really exaggerate the softness of intensity on the softer notes. And then try playing soft loud. Okay. Since you're prepared for the next note, if you play this exercise playing with the notes very short, I'm ready to play the second note of this exercise right now. All right? Once again, now. Okay? So if I just want to play faster, all I've got to do is cut down the amount of time my hand is sitting there waiting to play. So if you give us this challenge of accents and play with short notes, after working maybe 10 or 15, well, maybe not that long, maybe 10 minutes on this exercise, and then you just test yourself by trying to play it fast, you'll find that you'll have gotten to a point faster than if you just gradually tried to crank up the metronome. Here's a major scale exercise for the right hand. You'll see the fingering in your booklet. You dampen each note as you play it. The fingering, the dampen's written out for you. I added the D to the scale so that eventually, once you get it into up to tempo, you can play it in 4/4. All right. Okay. You'll see that my right hand's doing all the dampening. That means that you're preparing for the next note, and you can see in the fingering chart that by dampening and doing this placement that you are preparing yourself for the notes. One thing you'll notice about the exercise is that the first three notes, the fingering, all right, is outlined or highlighted so that for the next three notes you use the exact same fingering. So if you practice the first three notes, play with 1, dampen with 2, play with 2, dampen with the thumb. Third finger is already there, ready to go. You play with the third note, dampen with the first finger, and then reset everything, all right, before you begin to play the next note. You're set up for the next 6 notes or something like that. That fingering imitates itself ascending. Descending, I exclusively just use 1 and 2, and the third finger trails in behind and dampens. All right, so in this closed position, the third finger is always on an upper string, ready to play the first note to allow me to shift into the next higher notes. You notice at the end of the scale, you end up crossed up starting with 2. But all you have to do is just interchange those for the first 2 notes, and you're back on track. Here's 4 right-hand exercises that involve the left hand. And if you get all of them under your fingers, you'll end up covering just about every kind of shift that's involved in playing the right-hand 3-finger technique. I'm going to play this first one real slow so you can check out the fingering for it. And if you play a 4-string, just leave out the middle bar of every line, and you'll be able to use the same exercise. fingering just repeats itself ascending. The first thing you want to work on this first example is to make sure that you're dampening every note cleanly and not lifting up on the left hand for the dampening. Most of the time the buzzes, when that happens, it will be obvious to you. Okay, the goal is to dampen the right hand here. When you do dampen the right hand on this exercise, then you're prepared to play the next note. All right, so once you're comfortably dampening everything with the right hand, the next thing to do is gradually creep up the tempo. All right, because by then you'll have taught your hand the efficiency of dampening and waiting for the next note. All right, and you can work this exercise all the way up to the neck, to the top of the neck and down again. You'll see ascending and descending that you're leading with the upper octave. Exercise number 2 basically does the same thing, but you start out with the lower octave. Here it is slowed down so you can see the right hand fingering for it. Number 3 is a combination of 1 and 2 that allows you to ascend differently. Your half-step shift is on the outer strings. And you end up with 4 notes in a row on a string, the outer strings. Here it is slowed down for the right hand fingering. And you just work your way up the neck. Number 4 is also a combination of 1 and 2, except you start on the inner string with the lower octave first, and your shifts are, if you have a 5 string, your shifts ascending are all on the A string. Here it is slowed down for the right hand fingering. And on up the neck. Once you've got these first few right hand exercises under your hands, the next thing to do is to take things that you normally play, and like bass lines and other grooves that you've learned, and make a focused effort to teach your right hand to apply some of these dampening, playing softer, and finger preparation techniques from these exercises. One thing I've found that a lot of students and bass players that I've seen tend to teach their right hand through their left hand. Whatever you learn over here, the right hand is kind of left up to its own devices to develop. So when you're working on this, make a conscious effort to glue your eyes to your right hand so that you can be in control of every little movement that goes on down there. Here's an example of what I do with the right hand. I'm going to play a funk groove, and not in any particular key, and I'll combine some of the fingerings that are involved in the 4 right hand exercises with the octaves and some of the linear stuff that comes from the scale exercise. All right, we're going to take a break here and play a tune of mine called Renegade. This is an approach I've developed for learning the neck and harmony on the bass, and it addresses some of the difference between bass players and guitar players and keyboard players. Since we're required like 99% of the time to play one note at a time, we have to look at harmony as a linear thing that happens over time. One thing I've found about learning lines is that I've had a lot of students come to me that know their scales and arpeggios real well, but when they try to use that information in a linear fashion, like in a groove or soloing, you end up sounding just like a scale and arpeggio. So what you have to understand, first of all, is the strong beat, weak beat concept. If you take quarter notes in a bar, the strong beats are on 1 and 3, the weak beats are on 2 and 4. Your ear wants to hear the harmony satisfied on the strong beats, and it really doesn't care that much what's on 2 and 4. And I'll play an exercise or a little example right now that'll demonstrate that fact. In order to organize the notes on the neck into a line that we like, first of all, you have to learn where they are on the neck. Chords are built in thirds, and if you look in your booklet, you'll see some diagrams of 4 seventh chords. I think there's 4 different quality of diatonic seventh chords, and you'll see them over the whole fingerboard. And what you can see there is that it really doesn't matter where you go in the neck for any particular chord. You're never going to be more than a whole step away from a chord tone. And where that becomes valuable for us is that if you're playing a line and you want to satisfy the strong beats with chord tones in 1 and 3, you're never going to be a whole step away from going and getting that sound. Since you're never more than a whole step away from a chord tone, it's possible to create lines on the bass that only use half steps or whole steps and still get you chord tones on the strong beats. What this also accomplishes is that it keeps you from jumping around, which is a common problem with most people's bass lines. And it also keeps your lines from sounding strictly like scales. All right? So you end up not sounding like scales, you don't sound like arpeggios, but you end up with a line that satisfies the harmony to your ear. I'm going to play a walking bass line over C minor 7 to F7, 1 bar piece, and I'll be using this half step, whole step approach, and I'll be putting chord tones on the strong beats 1 and 3. There are 3 basic positions that you can begin to apply this concept to, and they involve placing the first, second, and fourth finger on the root of whatever harmony you're working on. All right. If we take some basic harmony information like the C major scale, all right, we can start by placing the first finger on it. Take the C on the E string. Second finger on it. Fourth finger on it. Okay. From those 3 basic positions, it really doesn't matter where you go in the neck, you're going to borrow from at least 2 of those. Take this C major right here, starting with the second finger. If I end up here, obviously that's symmetric, it duplicates itself. Here, little fingers on the C, duplicates itself here. For any information below the C, right, in this position, it'll be covered from when your first finger was on the C. Okay. So if you're here, obviously this is symmetric with this part. Any descending information when you're here is covered here from this basic position. So if you learn those three basic positions, whatever harmony you're working on, then you can move your hand around to different parts of the neck and still use the same information because of the symmetry of the neck. Here's a walking bass line using this concept, and it's 2-5-1 in C. There's 2 bars per chord change, and I'm outlining chord tones on 1 and 3, and you'll hear and see on your workbook the choices I'm using for the passing notes. Here's the same bass line, and we're going to use the 8 notes that we chose for the bass line as 8th notes as a solo, and I'm going to put it up an octave and play it faster. And what you're going to find is that it makes a good sounding solo line. One thing to remember about this concept is that it's a method to learn the neck and learn how to play harmony. When you're playing music, and when I play music, I try to use every possible device or way of thinking about it. I don't just limit myself to half steps and whole steps. I'll use arpeggios, I'll use scales, I'll use pentatonics, everything I can think of, and some things that I don't think of. Here's an example of how I use the 3 basic types of information that we're concerned with. Scales and arpeggios and the chromatics that are involved in learning this half-step, whole-step approach. And I'll be playing over D minor. When you're using these 3 basic hand positions that are determined by putting 1, 2, or 4 on the root of the first chord of whatever harmony you're working on, remember that this process is focused on teaching your hands what's underneath them. A common problem in a lot of bass players that I notice is that when chords change or when harmony changes, the tendency is to go to wherever the root of that chord is with the first or second finger and then play familiar information. And the problem with that is that you end up with lines and music that sounds real jumpy. So what you need to do is confine your hand to a location and teach yourself what's underneath it. So once you pick that basic first position, line up a finger to a fret and hold to that. Any notes that you play in that position, have them play with the corresponding finger. If anything exists outside of that 4-fret area, just do a half step shift with descending or ascending to get a note like that, or and immediately come back in with the next note into your original position. That'll constantly reinforce to your eyes as well as your hand that what you're learning is underneath your fingers. And the end result is that it won't matter where your hand is for whatever particular harmony that happens. You'll be able to see it. One of the benefits of teaching your hand the notes available and the harmony that's underneath it is that you don't have to shift nearly as much, or if any, when chords change. Here's an example of a couple of bars of C major 7, a couple of bars of A flat major 7, a totally unrelated key center. And I'm going to confine my hand to one basic position and play a solo over those two chords. This is the fretless that I play almost all the time. It's an Ibanez they built for me. It's a 5-string. One of the things you'll notice that are different about it is this piece between the pickups here. And it's something I put in there. It came from back when I tried 2 jazz pickups next to each other on an old jazz bass. And I like the feel, since I play with 3 fingers, I like the feel of the pickups underneath my fingers. So this piece there is just to extend that feeling, so that with my 3 fingers I can place my hand on the strings and be ready to play. It's real comfortable, and it keeps me from digging in too much. It helps with the light touch that I've tried to develop. The most obvious problem that playing fretless presents is how to play in tune. And one of the techniques I developed and try to tell people to develop is hand-eye coordination. And the first thing you can do to develop that is obviously to have lines. I can play, now that I've been playing fretless about 10 or 11 years, I have the ability to play with my eyes closed. But in order to initially develop this hand-eye coordination with the frets and where to put your fingers, I think you should start out with lines. The first thing to work on when you're trying to play in tune is always give yourself a pitch to judge yourself by. If it's an open string on the bass itself or some kind of pre-recorded example, so that you always have that pitch to judge your notes by. A good exercise to do is to record on a fretted or a piano or something like that, record a major scale. And then on fretless, start out like a 5th above and play major scale, or start out a 3rd above and play that same major scale. And try to play it very slow and try to keep each note in tune. Another thing you can work on is that you can teach your, if you can teach your first finger to locate itself in the right place, all the time as far as shifting, then the other 3 fingers can learn eventually to space themselves correctly. One specific technique as far as how to tune up notes is the ability to rotate and pivot on each finger. It's kind of tricky to develop, but it allows you to. You can see how I did it right there. I kind of rotated the note into being in tune. All right, I'll do it with the third finger. Another benefit of this is that it gives you a more characteristic fretless sound. Instead of just hitting a flat pitch and having to be in tune, all right, you can, even if it is in tune, you can move it just a little bit, and it adds that extra little color or waver to the pitch that makes it sound more like a fretless. Just a little bit. So while you're looking for the pitch, you can find it, or if you're right on it, you can still put that little vibrato in there. Another reason I have lines on my bass is that you can't really consistently locate your finger in the same place for every fret. Say for instance my G string, I always have to play a little bit sharper to play in tune down on the second fret than if I'm up on some real high frets. There I have to move further back away from the fret, or use the fret line. So it's not exactly in the same position as it is to play this in tune. And so those little discrepancies you have to learn by visually watching where it takes to play a note in tune. Another benefit of controlling this pivot on your fingers is that it'll give you more command over your vibrato. One of the trickiest things to do is not to sound nervous with your vibrato. It's easy once you establish that you can do this pivot to sound real shaky. What you have to do is listen to singers and check out how they're in control of it. What you want to do is get a nice, it doesn't take very much movement at all. To get a nice natural sound in vibrato, it takes actually very little movement in the left hand pivoting on those notes. I hope you got something out of what we covered today. In closing, I'd like to thank Kirk Covington for joining me on these tunes, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you.